At 90 years old, Margaret Maggie Brooks had experienced more than most could fathom. As a field nurse during World War II, she had tended to soldiers bleeding out in foreign fields, wrapped tourniquets with trembling hands under enemy fire, and whispered final words to young boys far from home. The war had hardened her, but time had tempered her into something even stronger, resilient, compassionate, and wise beyond her years. She lived alone in a faded cottage on the outskirts of Willow Creek, a quiet town where the pace of life was slow, and neighbors waved from their porches, exchanging stories over slices of pie at the local diner. Her husband, George, had passed away nearly 20 years ago, and her children, now scattered across the country, called often but visited rarely. Maggie didn't mind. She had her garden, her books, and the letters from her grandchildren, neatly tied with red ribbons, tucked away in her nightstand. But lately, peace had become a distant memory. Trouble started slowly, creeping in like a storm on the horizon. A biker gang, the Iron Wolves, had rolled into town a few months ago. At first, they kept to the outskirts, revving their engines near the woods and hosting loud parties by the riverbank. The locals complained, but the sheriff was too old to handle the ruckus, and the town council preferred to look the other way. Then the bikers found Maggie. It began with small things: a beer bottle shattered on her gravel driveway, cigarette but scattered in her flower beds, candy wrappers caught in her porch railing. Annoying, but nothing Maggie couldn't handle. She muttered under her breath, cleaned up the mess, and moved on with her day. But then they started escalating. They began showing up at night, revving their engines right outside her house, shaking the windows, rattling the glass in the cabinets. Sometimes, they would shine their headlights into her bedroom window, casting long, cruel shadows on the walls. Maggie didn't scare easily, but even she could feel the unease creeping into her bones. Yet, she refused to leave the house George had built with his own hands. One evening, after a particularly loud barrage of engine noise and rowdy laughter, Maggie shuffled out on her porch, wearing her worn slippers and with her cane steady in her grip. She stared directly at them. "Do you boys have nothing better to do than harass an old woman?" she called, her voice calm and unwavering, like a lake before dawn. The gang erupted in laughter, and one of the bikers stepped forward. He was a hulking man, his arms covered in tattoos, a snarling wolf inked around his bicep. A cigarette dangled from his lips as he looked at her like she was a joke. "Just having some fun, Grandma," he sneered. "This house, this land, ain't for people like you anymore." Maggie's eyes narrowed. She had heard rumors some hotshot developer had been offering cash to buy up land along the ridge. She had refused every offer. This house wasn't just property. It was history, love, memories. And she wasn't going anywhere. But the bikers weren't just bullies. They were messengers. Someone wanted her gone. And Maggie wasn't about to let them win. Days passed, then a week. The Iron Wolves didn't stop. They only grew bolder. Every time Maggie stepped outside, there were more signs of their presence. A garden hose slashed, trash bags dumped by her back door, her beloved ceramic angel smashed into pieces. It wasn't until that Saturday evening, just before sunset, that things took a turn she couldn't ignore. The golden light spilled across her porch, and the scent of lavender lingered in the air when she heard the growl of engines. Not one or two, but at least 6. They came barreling up the street like wolves released from their cage. Maggie stood at her front window, her hand trembling ever so slightly on her cane, watching as the bikers didn't stop on the road but tore through her lawn, their tires shredding flower beds and crushing the late summer marigolds. One biker popped a wheelie, laughing as he kicked dirt on her porch. Another pulled out a can of spray paint and scrawled something crude on her white picket fence in angry red letters. "Get out." That's when Maggie knew this wasn't about scaring her anymore. It was eviction by intimidation. Still, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She walked back inside, her jaw clenched, her mind clearer than it had been in years. She moved into the den, past the black and white photo of her and George on their wedding day, past the shadow box of her old Red Cross armband, and reached for the antique rotary phone that had sat on the wall for decades. Her fingers, stiff with age, dialed a number she hadn't called in over 40 years. It rang once before a gravelly voice answered. "Hello. It's Maggie Brooks," she said calmly. "I'm calling in that favor." There was silence on the other end, followed by a deep breath. "We're on our way," the voice said. "Hold tight." Maggie hung up. Outside, the bikers continued their laughter, destroying her lawn, unaware of the storm heading their way. They had no idea who she had just called, and no idea what was coming for them. Exactly 23 minutes later, the sound of distant engines filled the air. The revving was deeper, heavier, more deliberate than the high-pitched screech of the Iron Wolves. The bikers stopped mid-laugh and looked up the road. That's when they saw them. A formation of nearly 20 motorcycles came thundering around the bend. The engines roared like thunder rolling off the mountains. The riders wore matching black leather jackets, each with a silver emblem stitched on the back, a serpent coiled around sword. The silver serpents had arrived.